Recently, my granddaughter and I launched the Dream Big Kitchen. And yes, she ate way too much cookie dough. The kids helped, which means the process took 3 times as long and created 10 times the mess. But years from now, they're not going to remember that I had to clean up afterward. They'll remember the smell of cookies baking in the oven, the outtakes when Tommy stubbed his toe while videotaping, and we took the time to bandage it up while filming, and how we laughed at all the mistakes. A listener wrote in, "Everything you said is so true, and if they want to help, you should let them. Yes, it takes longer to make and clean up, but they love doing it with us." Laurel wrote that she and her grandson went on a walk and collected items to make a shadow box with. He made me make a video of him telling a story he made up about his shadow box. It's all about the memories. You're absolutely right, Laurel. And in honor of that wonderful experience, we're launching the Grand Challenge. So the 750% gap is real, but it doesn't have to be your family's destiny. We're gamifying the motherboard to bring our partners and grandkids back into the center of the mission. Are you ready to bridge the gap? Download your 10-hour mission log and join the Grand Challenge right here in the link in the show notes. Who are you teaming up with for your first mission? Write in and let us know. Yes, your day might have been a complete dumpster fire, but does that mean you're failing? Today's guest, a former high-stakes trial lawyer, says the case of the shoulds is the biggest threat to your family's infrastructure. We're tearing up the 1950s grandmother stereotype and replacing it with the warrior heart. It's time to stop submitting to the labels and start rewriting the script for the next generation. Welcome to Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, Nurturing Through Adversity. In this podcast, we will delve deep into the challenges and triumphs of grandparents raising grandchildren. As we navigate the complexities of legal, financial, and emotional support, I invite you to join us on a journey of exploring thoughts, feelings, and beliefs surrounding this growing segment of our society. Drawing from real stories and expert advice, we will explore the nuances of child rearing for children who have experienced trauma and offer valuable resources to guide you through the intricate journey of kinship care. We'll discuss how we can change the course of history by rewriting our grandchildren's future, all within a supportive community that understands the unique joys and struggles. This podcast was made especially for you. Welcome to a community where your voice is heard, your experiences are valued, and your journey is honored. I'll be honest with you. I spent years trying to be a version of a grandmother that doesn't actually exist. I had this vision of a calm, quiet woman, always wearing a clean apron, and when I couldn't meet that bar, I felt like a D student in my own life. But talking to Nancy Lasater changed my frequency. She reminded me that we are unconventional by definition. I realized that my granddaughter's dyslexia isn't a broken part of her motherboard, it's just a different wiring schematic. This conversation gave me the permission to be messy, to be a rebel, and to trust my gut over the conveyor belt of the school system. Nancy Lasater has spent years as a high-stakes trial lawyer, professional painter, and a long-distance hiker. But her most profound work lies in her novels about the courage it takes to be human. Her work, specifically her novel Farmer's Son, is exactly what it sounds like, a practical map for understanding how labels, secrets, and family misunderstandings can shape and sometimes break generations. Hi, Nancy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Nancy's written a book called The Farmer's Son. Nancy writes about everyday people like you and I. She's talking in her new book, Farmer's Son, about dyslexia. For many of us grandparents, that was a label that we never knew about before this generation. I'll talk to you a little bit more later on in our conversation about Nancy's book, because she's going to show us how the format is written differently for people with dyslexia. So I want you to see that. Nancy, in your work, you advocate for the idea of choosing to fight rather than submit to the chains that bind us, which I think is so important because in this world of kinship care, so many of us feel bound by these labels, school evaluations, and some very painful family secrets. When your life feels like one big emergency, how do you stop letting the crisis run the show and start deciding for yourself what the future of your family looks like when all of that is going on?
My overall philosophy about things is just to say yes. Yes, today is a complete dumpster fire. Yes, it may continue to be awful for the next 3 weeks or 3 years or whatever. I think that a big part of the stress that we have is the idea that we're supposed to function easily and smoothly, that we're supposed to be able to dispose of these challenges efficiently, and that's just not how things go. We're all human. We're dealing with things that we never thought we'd have to deal with, and I'm somebody who believes that we're all carrying something. We're all dealing with something. We don't always talk about what we're dealing with, but we've all got some burden we're having to carry with us. And so saying yes to the situation will reduce some of that added stress, because what we get rid of to some extent is the shoulds. And back when I was practicing as an attorney, I would say to my clients, I think you've got a case of the shoulds. It should look like this. My future should be this way. This should have happened differently. That person should have treated me another way. I should have gotten that promotion. And the answer to that is yes. And what are you going to do about this? Yes, you should feel exactly how you feel for as long as you want to feel it. And then you're going to cope with this, which is a way to validate the experience and wallow in it for as long as you need to wallow in it. God bless you. And then pick yourself up and wake up the next day and get going.
We talked about labels and how labels can affect us. I thought it was so wonderful when I figured out what was going on in the mind of my granddaughter, and they evaluated her and they gave her several labels. One of them was dyslexia. One of them was ADHD. Another was cognitive behavior disorder. And I thought, now I know how to treat her. I knew that she was having troubles in school. I knew she was having difficulty learning. So that was my reason for wanting to find out why. As I've learned about the human brain and how it works, there's so much that can be treated through things like books for dyslexic children. And because she can read better, she's a happier person. She doesn't feel judged in school. She doesn't feel different. What are your thoughts about how early branding can create an identity that dictates behavior for a lifetime?
Well, you make a really good point. I think from the point of view of the caregiver, having that information is tremendously helpful. Using that information to say that this is the only way that little Jimmy can be is where you might run into trouble. But from the from the point of view of the child who's got a diagnosis, and I have some knowledge of this. For the child, it may very well be denial, it may be anger, it may be I'm not that way, and if I am that way, I don't want to talk about it, and no, don't use those tools with me, and don't help me with a thing because I'm denying that I have the thing. And that can go on for several years because the child I haven't been in that position as the child, but it would seem to me that it would be the child's taking that time to absorb the reality of their situation and then sort of testing that answer against their own lived experience to say, I really am having trouble reading this book, or, hey, I am having trouble with my distractibility. I know of a child where after going to a 3D movie and wearing 3D glasses, she didn't want to take off the 3D glasses. And when I said, you mean you don't see in 3 dimensions all the time? Her response was, You mean you do? And that's how I knew that the child might have had an eyesight issue, not a dyslexia issue, but an eyesight issue.
Yeah.
It's information for us, as long as we don't shove it down their throats. In the case of dyslexia, it's a different brain orientation. The brain is built differently, but for example, dyslexics and I'm making a gross generalization across, and everybody's different, so forgive me. But generally speaking, dyslexics test as more intelligent than the average bear, which means that you're now dealing with a child who is exceptionally smart and at the same time challenged. So you've got that balancing that you've got to constantly handle. Many dyslexics, not everybody, but many dyslexics have a really good spatial acuity, so that, for example, if you're a mechanic, you can actually see the other side of the engine that you can't actually see. But in your mind's eye, it is clear to you where that part is, and you know exactly where to put your hand or whatever tool you're using to get at that part in a way that I would never know. I would not have a clue because I don't have the behind the thing spatial ability. And I know dyslexics who do. So many dyslexics will gravitate towards mechanics because they have that special skill. Yeah. So a label can actually give you some benefits for your child, or grandchild.
I'm so glad you said that, because it reminds me that we have these labels like dyslexia, and people don't understand them thoroughly, and so they make judgments that aren't correct.
Yes.
Right?
And based on our own information and our own experience as non-dyslexics. You really have to hear from the child in a way with curiosity to say, okay, Mary, what's it like for you when you try to read? Because what you're assuming about Mary's reading experience is maybe from your own, not from her.
Right.
And so for her to describe to you, hey, the words are jumping around, or I can't focus on the word, or I'm seeing two different sets of words on my visual planes because my brain isn't merging them together.
Kids on the spectrum have the most imaginative minds. They can say the silliest things. On the other hand, my world can get way too serious. Sometimes the best thing to do is get on the train with them. Here's another fun self-care tip with Jeanette Yates.
This next strategy is something I've had to adopt as my mom has become more confused. She has a few hallucinations. She's not always connected with the reality I am in. And I have started asking more questions about where she is in her reality or what she is experiencing. So I will, ask more questions. So the other day, she imagined that she was on a train ride. I was actually not me, her daughter. I was a train employee. So she was telling me her thoughts about the train ride, asking me how long I had worked for the train. So I answered that question. But then I didn't know what to say because, I'm not really a train person. So instead of me answering the questions, I started asking her, what do you like most about the train? What do you see outside the window? How, are you comfortable in your seat? These are things. And I just found that when possible, if we can get into the mindset of the person that we're caring for, if it's safe for us to do so, sometimes it's not, then we can allow ourselves to see things through their eyes. And it provides more empathy, but also in the case of this situation, some levity and some fun because she's telling me all about this amazing train trip. And I happen to know the woman has never been on a train in her life. So she is imagining the most beautiful, exciting train ride ever. And I get to be on it with her. And that is a great blessing and fun activity. And you get to, we have to ride the roller coaster of caregiving that's up and down and all around and scary as crap sometimes. But sometimes we get to ride on a train and it's nice and beautiful and fun. And so hop on the train if you can. It's my advice today.
If you want to learn more about Jeanette, go to her website at theselfcaregiver.com. She's got a great new book coming out and a wonderful podcast, From Guilt to Good. If you enjoy our fun little self-care tips, leave us a review on our website or on the podcast, and be sure to tell us which one was your favorite. Yes.
Children can have that situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you made that clarification. That's so true. Before we move deeper into some systemic questions that I want to ask you, which I ask every guest for my book research, well, tell everyone where they can get your book and your website and any other pertinent information that you'd like to share.
Absolutely. The book is called Farmer's Son. It's available in print on Amazon, soon to be available through Barnes & Noble and other places as well. The ebook is available on all the usual ebook platforms, and the audiobook is coming out in the next few weeks. Dyslexic community wanted an audiobook of this because there are people in the dyslexia community who truly have difficulty with the page. No matter how big you blow up the font, audiobook is a great way for them to hear a story about their lives. And it's not just about dyslexics, it's not just for dyslexics. It's about family secrets. It's about fathers and sons. It's about strong women who are truth tellers in their family and force necessary change because they won't go along with the program. But yes, the audiobook will be available shortly. It took me 2 years to record it.
Well, I've really, truly enjoyed it, and I'm so excited to be able to share it with others because it tells a story that I think too often is so true with families where there are misunderstandings about someone's abilities and disabilities and how that affects them and how our misunderstandings are projected on others.
For generations.
And that's something that I think is very important to bring to light. We pass these, we'll call them disabilities, mental illnesses, perspectives, addictions, down in families from one family to another, which is the basis behind why we as grandparents are raising these grandchildren. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are tragic deaths involved, which is why we have the kids. But usually, if they're with us and their parents are alive, it's a pretty serious situation that officials come in and take kids away from their parents. So I love how you write about very real people and situations and bring some of these tragedies to life in your books. You know, I did mention to our listeners in the introduction that you were a high-stakes trial lawyer, a painter, and that you love hiking, but that your favorite work right now is writing these novels about the courage that it takes to be human. Can you tell us just a little bit, because I got to talk with you before I shared this interview with everyone else, and you're such a fascinating person. What brought you into the work of being a high-stakes trial lawyer to being a writer?
Well, people say that lawyers lie all the time, both in what we say and what we write. I have been writing legal briefs since I was first admitted to practice a very, very long time ago. So I've always written, and I've always written stories on the side as well. I wrote my first quote-unquote novel, and I say that with air bunnies, 10, a very long time ago. But yes, my life has been unconventional from the start. I think one of the things and I'm not raising grandchildren, so I have nothing but immense awe for what you're doing. But raising grandchildren means that you're unconventional because it's not the conventional script for grandparents. So if you're going to be unconventional anyway, probably not by choice, but if you're going to be unconventional anyway, then go for it, you know? And if that means advocating with the schools for a challenged child, then you're already, turned over the apple cart because here you are in this situation. So do it. Do whatever it is that these children need and what you need, and you're rewriting the stereotype. We talked a little bit about grandparent stereotypes, especially grandmother stereotypes. And, the grandmother that you and I saw when we were kids was someone born in the 1920s and 30s who's in the
Yes.
kitchen with their apron. And isn't that lovely?
Mm-hmm.
And we can wear an apron on occasion and bake cookies, and that's lovely. But that's not our day-to-day. Our day-to-day is now juggling this very unconventional life. I can only imagine, the dragons you have to slay every day in order to raise these grandchildren that you have. Yeah.
Well, we shared about this before and in our earlier conversation, but I think that we as women in this generation do have the seeds of rebellion within us. I encourage every grandmother out there that's listening to remember that is part of our spirit. And yes, we are traditionalists. And yes, there are beautiful things about that. But speaking the truth about what is happening in our families is more important than I think anything else we can do while we're nurturing. Sharing our stories is very valuable. Issues that all of us are going through in some form or another.
And you have to trust yourself that you're raising your children, in my case, and in your case, your children and your grandchildren. And it's not just, you're doing the best you can, like you're a D student and it was the best you could do. You're doing a fabulous job. And you and I talked a little bit about...
And falling on our face in between all those fabulous things we're doing.
Every day we are screwing up in a big way. In a big way. I would not want to be the child or the grandchild of a perfect caregiver, because what an impossible bar to meet. I would rather be the child of someone who is imperfect, who is able to talk about it, who is able to have the difficult conversations about how we've messed up, and then repair. So always come to me. Tell me how I've messed up. Tell me how I hurt you. And please tell me so that we can work on making it better. And if that can be modeled, then the child leaves us and grows further into adulthood, knowing how to do it with their own children and their own grandchildren. Perfect is not only impossible, but it's impossible to replicate, and it's boring. You don't learn things from perfect.
You know what's funny? Did you have a vision as a mother when you were raising your children? Did you have a picture of the kind of mother you thought you should be?
More likely, I had a picture of the parts from my mother and my grandmothers that I wanted to use and the parts I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So my image was cobbled together more. And then, of course, you learn on the hoof every single day. This isn't working. I have to change that. Boy, I'm messing this up. Hey, looks like I did a good job today. You and I were having a conversation about your grandson saying, this is my body and you can't boss it. My approach to my children, granted children, not grandchildren, but my approach to my children was, your body is actually mine until your 18th birthday. Because my job as your mom is to deliver your body back to you on your 18th birthday as beautifully as I received it when you were born. So my job is to keep the broken bones to a minimum, keep the tattoos to a minimum, keep the piercings to a minimum. And on your 18th birthday, you can go out and do whatever you want to do. But until then, it's my job to offer you back to yourself the way you were born. Yeah.
Well, my picture of being a grandparent, which I didn't really realize I had in my head until recently, was this very calm, quiet woman who was always together in the way she dressed and looked. Not as young as me, maybe a little older, but she always had the right answer. She was always cooking over the stove. She was always there playing with them. It was an impossibly perfect person. I never in that image saw a woman. I saw her get angry in my mind, but I never saw her fall apart. I never saw her say a wrong word. I never saw her depressed or disappointed. A very godly woman, definitely. I've told you, I'm a very spiritual person, but it was not me. My vision of who I thought I should be as a grandmother was not me. And that was a wake-up call. The disappointment of not being the person that I thought I was more where my mess came from than who I am, because I never really could let myself live fully as I am in my own messiness and in my own joy. I mean, that sounds complicated, but just
Oh, I'm
I
with you.
wanted to bring that up because I think for many people, maybe the vision we have of who we're going to be as a grandparent is more dysfunctional than who we're going to be as a parent.
Well, it's more set.
Yeah.
It's more
Well, we've
fixed.
set this whole picture of retirement
And it's all
for a long
fixed.
time in our minds.
Perhaps. And our grandparents, when we went to go visit grandmother, she was on, and again, air bunnies. She's on for the visit of everybody, and she's cooking Thanksgiving. My grandmother used to make Thanksgiving, and one time cooked the giblets inside the bird, and that imperfection gave all of us a laugh for the day. But we're there for a limited amount of time, and to the grandchildren, that person looks perfect, and the home
That's
is
probably.
tidy, and we're not seeing the before and after. We're not seeing the sudden, the cleanup for days. We're not seeing all the martinis that she may have had after we left. We're not
True.
seeing her trying to afford the grocery store. We're just seeing that beautiful, what is it, Father Knows Best from the 1950s episode. And we're not seeing all the production and the Klieg lights and everything behind the set.
And what we do to ourselves for not being that person is just awful.
And it's
How we beat ourselves up
yeah.
is terrible.
And the moments when you are that person, when you're baking the cookies and you're putting them in the oven, take a moment and say, here I am. And then know that the rest of your day is a dumpster fire.
Yeah. Well, I had to ask you that because you are such an eclectic person that I can relate to, and you've had such an amazing life. And I love the writing, of course, that you're doing now, and it's very relatable and important work. But I had to ask you what led you from one to the other. So thanks for sharing that with us.
You're welcome. I've told lies all my life.
I want to ask you a systematic question, and it has to do with your legal background. You've seen the world through the eyes of a litigator. Looking at your transition into writing about disabilities like dyslexia, what do you think is the biggest blind spot in our legal or educational infrastructure that prevents families from seeking the truth about a child's needs until the damage is already done?
It's not so much legal in my mind because I'm familiar with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, years ago when I was practicing in that area, but I can talk a little bit about the educational system, which is not meant for atypical students of any stripe.
Yeah.
And what will happen is the child, often boys who are challenged, will begin to get bored and act out. And for example, in dyslexia, boys are diagnosed with dyslexia 6 times more often than girls are. And
I didn't realize that.
It's not because dyslexia is more prevalent to that degree in boys. It's because when girls can't read, they'll daydream and they'll get quiet and withdrawn and they won't act out, so that they're not going to be a behavioral problem in the school. So I guess what I'm saying is systemically, it's not in the school's best interest to point out the children who are not conventional, because it's a conveyor belt of conventional treatment. And I don't blame the school system. They've got to teach to the majority. I get all of that. Trust your instincts is what I would say about the system. If the system does not seem to be working for your child or your grandchild, stand up and get them tested. It's not terribly expensive to get them tested. There may be resources to do it for free or subsidizing testing. Schools these days know about dyslexia much more than they did at the time of the book that I wrote. So there are going to be ways for people to get tested. And if your child is saying to you, I'm bored in school, but they seem really smart, or they're interested outside of school in other things. School may just not be their bag, but maybe it's a reading problem or an attention problem. Trust your gut is what I would say. And don't necessarily trust the system more than your own gut about your child.
Thank you. I think that's important. Your work addresses the parts of family life that stay unspoken. In kinship care, it's often considered taboo to admit that we feel squeezed or resentful of the obligatory self-sacrifice. How can a grandmother, do you think, acknowledge the tragedy her family has faced while still holding that warrior heart required to move the family forward?
Anybody who is listening to your podcast is doing just that already. Your listeners have been handed something they never expected that they're now stepping up to do. And they have put the future of these children ahead of their own preconceived notions of what these years would look like for themselves. These folks, your listeners, already have a warrior heart and yet are devoted to the best interests of their families. At the same time, I'm in awe of people who are doing all of this. In terms of maintaining a warrior heart, trust your gut, take your breaks when you have to, meditate. It works for me. Step back, praise yourself on a regular basis, even for the small stuff. Praise yourself out loud, because we process in our minds out loud things in a different way than we do if we're thinking about them. And so if you've done something great, you can say, wow, I made a wonderful dinner in 5 seconds for my whole family tonight. And tomorrow I'm going to beat up the school principal, and I'm going to be good at that too. If you say it out loud, you sort of realize sometimes, wow, I really am good at this, or today was a good day.
Yes.
Because our brains work overtime and our mouths are slower than our minds are. So,
yes. Yeah. Well, that's a great answer. So, Nancy, policy question. If you were the COO of the country and you were tasked with redesigning the support system for grandparents raising grandchildren, what one policy would you implement to ensure that caregiving doesn't become a life sentence that erases a caregiver's own identity?
One of the policy things that I would do, because I think that grandparents in your situation deserve as much financial support as possible, because it gives a level of comfort and peace of mind to then think about other things. But I would certainly expand the child care tax credit. Right now, you only get to claim it if the child is under your roof more than half the time. It's not just that you're caring for them during the day. They have to actually be living with you as your dependent. And many folks might fall into that category, but a lot of others are not. There are a lot of grandparents that are basically raising their grandchildren while both parents are working crazy hours or juggling multiple jobs in today's economy.
Because they can't afford childcare.
Because they can't afford childcare, and the grandparents have so kindly stepped up to do it for their children, their loved children. I would like for the children to have the child care tax credit because they're living in their homes with their moms and dads. But I'd like for the grandparents to be recognized, to be able to take a credit as well if they are, full-time caring for them. Or, I just don't like the more than 50% under your roof rule very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be a policy change I would make.
And we talked about earlier that if you fall into the middle income bracket, there is no financial help for you. And I think that does not make sense. If you let your children go into the foster care system and then take them out, there is some subsidy, which doesn't make any sense to me at all, because that change causes more damage than it does good. Not that I don't think the foster care system is good. It's just that putting a child through that and then taking them back out of it doesn't help. I forgot to ask you to show us about the
book
before
format.
we go.
The book format.
Please show us your book and how it's printed for dyslexic people.
I was assisted with this by a young woman with an eyesight difficulty, and we wanted to make sure that it was readable by her and at the same time look completely normal. Hold on.
Wow. That's amazing.
Just a second.
Amazing.
Yeah, what I did with this.
I've just never had privy to a book written for dyslexics.
Well,
Is that uncommon? Is it
books aren't done
uncommon?
this way. Books are not done this way. And that's why it was so important for me to do a print copy of this book. There was a high school for special needs in Indiana, and I adore that school. The principal and founder of the school assigned Farmer's Son to all of the rising seniors to read during the summer between the junior and senior year. And then she brought me in to talk to the school. And when I met one of the brand new senior young men, I think he was 18, in English class, he got up in the class, he put his hand over his heart, and he told me that it was the first book that he had ever read all the way through. And because it was about him, and because he was able to read it. And it was important for the school founder to give out physical copies of the book so that there was a sense of achievement when these challenged children got through it. And so I was advised.
What a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. I was advised to make the margins especially wide, top, bottom, everywhere, and to make the spacing, I think it's called kerning, in between the lines wide, because if people are following with their fingers, they won't lose their place as much.
Okay.
So they can follow along. I also had a dyslexia expert tell me, as I was thinking about writing this book, that dyslexics, and everybody's different and there's no real generalization, but overall, dyslexics think in images, as I wrote in the book. Dyslexics think in images and not words necessarily. So if you say to a dyslexic, the cat on the roof, they're going to see a cat, they're going to see a roof, but the article's the cat, the roof. The has no image attached to it. So often those words get dropped off and they don't get visualized when a dyslexic is reading. So that I was told by an expert to make my book as cinematic as possible. So you listen to it. It's mostly all dialogue. There is setting. I can set up a setting, but then it's people talking because, like the rest of us, we'll drop to the dialogue in a story, and those big, long setting descriptions and narrative stuff. There's very little narration in this book because I wanted to write a book that if you don't think that the father is a jerk, I haven't done my job. So I don't need to write, Bobby was mad at his father because his father was a jerk. If I need to present his father being a jerk, and then you as the reader or listener say, boy, I hate this guy, then I've done my job if you're feeling it, rather than me beating it up on the page. So it's especially cinematic, and it's also formatted in a very unique way, but at the same time, and short chapters, very short chapters. I've just concluded with the audiobook, and it turns out that there are separate chapters or section headings for this book, which is unbelievably numerous for an audiobook. But that's because I wrote them so short. I mean, this is chapter 10 is one whole chapter. And I wanted to give dyslexics the experience of flipping through pages like, wow, I'm really reading this, and it's exciting. Yeah.
Well, yes. My granddaughter and I read together last night, and she said, Mama, we're going to just read 2 pages. And I said, okay. And she read it successfully. She goes, there, we're done. We're just reading 2 pages. And I said, now, does that make you feel good? She goes, yes, because I read it successfully. And now I can finish this evening and say I did well and go to bed instead of struggling through a whole chapter of a book. That really speaks to your format of having short chapters.
That's great. Yeah.
Wonderful, Nancy.
Thank you.
I'm listening to the Audible, so I did not see the written version. Now I'm really excited to take a look at that as well. Thanks, Nancy, for your work and for your time today. I know it was very valuable to many listeners.
Thank you. It was a delight.
Step into the reflection room with me. Take a breath. And look at the labels currently hanging over your household. whether they are school evaluations or painful family secrets, and ask yourself, am I believing these labels because they are true or because I'm afraid to turn over the apple cart? Today, I challenge you to say yes to the mess and then pick one area where you can stop shoulding on yourself. What would change if you fought for your grandchild's unique brain instead of trying to force it into a conventional box? Join us next week as we sit down with Dr. Lindsay Emerson. We're moving from the warrior heart to a better behavior blueprint. Dr. Lindsay is translating complex behavioral research into the 5 C's framework, which combines structure and love, creating an amazing parenting plan for grandparents raising grandchildren. We are 2.7 million strong, still nurturing and still here. We are the truth tellers in the kitchen, the advocates in the boardroom, and the ones willing to fail out loud so our grandchildren can learn how to repair. Your imperfection isn't a glitch. It's the very thing that makes you a leader. Keep nurturing, keep leading, and I'll see you in the next boardroom. I recently received an email from a listener named Laurel. At 61, Laurel and her husband, who's navigating his own health challenges, are now raising their grandson after a series of unimaginable losses. In 2022, they lost their son to a fentanyl overdose. Then just a year ago, they lost their daughter the same way. The morning after, they'd stayed up late together planning her son's 3rd birthday party. Laurel told me that she lives one day at a time. She's dealing with the financial strain of using her 401k to survive, the physical toll of caregiving, and the emotional weight of what ifs. But she also said something that I want everyone listening to hear. She said that just telling her story to people who can relate is refreshing. That's exactly why we do this. Whether you're navigating addiction in your family, raising a grandchild you didn't expect to be raising, or just trying to find your footing after a loss, we need to hear your story. There's always someone else out there who needs to hear that they aren't the only one. Your experience is a lifeline for someone else. So if you have a story to share, or if you're looking for that community Laurel found, please join our Facebook group or sign up for our newsletter on our website at grandparents-raising-grandchildren.org. Let's keep relating, and let's make sure no one walks this path in silence. Thank you, Laurel, for your courage to share your story with others.